I'd like you to walk me through what's happened to you since the events in Evergreen and bring everybody up to date on my end. So, man, maybe you could start with what happened at Evergreen, although I suspect many of the people watching this do know. Does that seem reasonable?
Sure. Yeah, we can start there. I think we should probably err in the direction of being sparse with the details and see where it leads us.
Yeah.
So in 2017, I was teaching at Evergreen, as was Heather, my wife, and she was literally Evergreen's most popular professor. I wasn't too far behind. I was very popular as well. Our classes were always overfull, and we accepted more people than we had to and had to turn some away anyway. And then in actually 2016, the new president of the college, George Bridges, began an initiative or a set of initiatives surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion. And these initiatives included the impaneling of a committee that was supposed to look into racism at the college, its impacts, and to propose solutions. And as it became clear what they were alleging and proposing, Heather and I became very alarmed. And I began to speak out, at first in faculty meetings, and then when the ability to speak out in faculty meetings became non-existent, I took to our faculty and staff email list to talk about the threat to the college that was created by these initiatives. And that, of course, brought about exactly what you would imagine, which were accusations that I was motivated by some kind of racism or white supremacy or white fragility, or who knows what the accusations were exactly. But in any case, I fought back anyway. And my sense was I had tenure and I was well liked and I was well known at the college. I'd been there for 14 years. And so I didn't think they had the power to get rid of me. And that gave me the ability to say what needed to be said about these proposals. Well, the upshot is that ultimately protesters, 50 students that I had never met, showed up at my classroom, accused me of racism, demanded that I either be fired or resign. I told them I wouldn't. And riots broke out at the college in which faculty and administrators were kidnapped. I was apparently hunted car to car on campus by protesters. The police were stood down by the college president, and we were basically left to fend for ourselves with student patrols roving the campus with weapons, baseball bats, and the like. So it was a chaotic scene. There was a lot of interest in it because it was very colorful. But of course, most people back in 2017 dismissed this as, yes, an overreaction, but you know how college students are. And those of us who saw it up close knew that that couldn't be the case, that it would ultimately spill out into civilization. And we, of course, were right. And now it's everywhere. We see it taking over institution after institution. In the US and Canada, we see it making tremendous strides in government, and there's no telling where it ends.
And what is, I mean, I have a bunch of questions that come out of that. I mean, so I'll lay out three. Why in the world did this bother you enough so that you took a stand, especially given your political leanings? Because you were, which I'm not criticizing, by the way, I'm just stating that it isn't obvious to begin with why it would be you that would take a stand, say, rather than someone else. But you did, and so I'm curious about why. And what is it that you saw coming? And what is this it that you're referring to? You've had a lot of time to be thinking about this now. It's been 4 years. And I mean, the other thing I want to ask you about is your life was thrown completely upside down, you and your wife. You don't have your job at the university anymore, either of you, despite the fact that you were tenured professors. It's not an easy thing to get another toehold in academia once you've been a tenured professor somewhere, especially if you've gone through what you went through, because no hiring committee anywhere is going to give you any consideration once you've been tarred by scandal, regardless of what your role in it was. They're far too conservative to ever do anything like that. And so, okay, so I don't know if I can remember the order in which I asked those questions, but I think the first one was, why in the world were you compelled to object? And what is it that you were objecting to, do you think?
Well, it's a funny question for you to pose to me, because I have the feeling that the answer will be entirely native to you. I literally don't believe I had any choice. People frequently ask me why I stood up. And my sense is, if I think through the alternative, I simply can't live with it. I can't sleep.
Yeah,
right?
But that doesn't seem to bother most people. So I don't get that.
Well,
like, why you?
Well, right. I mean, I guess that's the thing I'm discovering. So you alluded to my political leanings, and you and I both know what you mean by that. I'm a liberal, and I describe myself sometimes as a reluctant radical. By that, I mean that I believe we must engage in radical change if we are to survive as a species. But I also know that radical change is very dangerous. And so it's not like, I find most people who would call themselves radicals feel like radical change is always called for. And I don't. My sense is, I hope to see change that makes civilization good enough that I get to be a conservative, that I get to say, actually, we're doing so well that we have no choice but to preserve this. If we try to improve it, we'll mess it up. That's where I want to go. But what I'm discovering is that the bedrock of my liberalism is nothing like the underpinnings of the so-called liberalism of most of the people on the left side of the political spectrum. My liberalism comes from a sense that, yes, compassion is a virtue, but that policy must be based on a dispassionate analysis of problems. It is based on an understanding that the magic of the West comes from a tension between those who aspire to change things for the better, and those who recognize the danger of changing them at all. And so in any case, I think the short answer is, we look around the world and everybody makes arguments that sound as if they come from first principles, but most people do not arrive at conclusions from first principles. If they extrapolate at all, they don't do it very well. And that results in severe compartmentalization of thought. And that means that when confronted with changes that threaten a system on which we are dependent, most people don't recognize it. And if they do recognize it, they wouldn't know what to do about it. So how can I put it in plain terms? I had no choice, because I was as if on a ship where somebody had proposed to fix our course through a field of icebergs and navigate based on some absurd theory with no grounding in fact. Somebody had to object. And I was a little surprised at how few and far between the objectors were. But, if I'm to be totally candid about it, at the point that things went haywire at Evergreen, I had watched video of you reacting to protesters in Toronto. And it had made so much sense to me at a number of different levels. I recognized you as somebody who knew that although the initial proposals were arguably symbolic, that they were connected to things that ultimately were very much about an exercise of power and a transfer of well-being, and that it was therefore, you felt obligated to stand up and say no, which resulted, as you know better than anyone, in you being mocked for overreacting. And then here we are years later, and it turns out that you saw with absolute clarity what others couldn't even imagine.
Yes, but I certainly didn't see what was going to happen to me.
Right.
With clarity, so being
right.
quite
I don't
a strange route.
It wasn't possible to see what would happen with specificity to you. But am I correct in seeing that you knew that something very dramatic was likely to come from your standing on principle, and that didn't provide any license to do anything but make that stand?
I really can't say, it's a while ago now, so that's part of it. But so much has happened to me that's been so strange in the last 4 years that I have a very difficult time making any sense of it. I can't even really think about, especially the last 2 years, I can't really think about them in any consistent and comprehensive way. I mean, my family situation has been so catastrophic, and my illness and my wife's illness, it's just been, although she recovered completely, thank God, it's just been so utterly catastrophic that my thinking about it is unbelievably fragmented. And I'm struck dumb still to some degree by all of what emerged as a consequence of me making the first videos that I made. I went downstairs, talked to my wife and my son. My son was living at home at that time, temporarily. And I said, this piece of legislation is really bothering me because it calls for compelled speech. And I looked at the background documents and something wasn't right. And I said, I need to say something about it. They said, well, go for it. We'll see what happens. And all hell broke loose, and continues to break loose for that matter, which is one of the things that's so bloody strange about it, is it doesn't seem to end. And I would have thought when it first started, I thought, oh, well, I'd be a flash in the pan for a week or something, or 2 weeks, or a month, or 6 months, or a year, or 2 years, but it doesn't stop. And I really can't understand that. It's beyond my comprehension.